I call the member for Maitland.
Thank you, Mr Temporary Speaker. I rise to speak to the Health Legislation Amendment Bill, which aims to introduce measures that will identify systemic issues within our health system earlier, and this will hopefully promote quicker resolution of these problems, allowing health officials to communicate with patients and their families quicker. However, the Labor opposition does have concerns about the government legislating to exempt preliminary risk assessments from the Government Information Public Access Act, or GIPAs. We should seek to be introducing transparency and clarity over all mistakes that occur in our health system. Preliminary risk assessments will be carried out on reportable incidents or on incidents that may be the result of a serious systemic problem within our health system. This is a step which will allow for earlier disclosure of problems and will ensure that quick action is taken to resolve those problems. Assessments that reveal serious systematic problems systemic problems should be accessible to the public. They should be redacted to remove identifying information, certainly, and personal data, but the substance of these problems should be accessible under freedom of information laws. Governments and bureaucrats should not be allowed to cover up systemic problems without properly informing the public as to what these issues are and what steps they are taking to resolve them. This is so vital in a public health system which should be run to the betterment of everyone in our community. The Baird and Berejiklian governments have repeatedly blocked freedom of information requests on reportable incidents and sentinel events within our health system. The coalition government has introduced a culture of secrecy and cover-ups into our health system, which should be resisted at every stage. The Labor opposition will introduce amendments to this legislation in the other place to increase transparency measures within this bill. And this is so important, Mr Temporary Speaker, because we are seeing in our electorate offices as members of Parliament situations every day which indicate that there are systemic issues in the health system that are not being addressed. Recently, for example, I was contacted by a constituent whose circumstances would surely have prompted a preliminary risk assessment under these changes. In January 2017, so a year ago, a constituent from my electorate, Mr Beniston, was injured in a soccer incident which was causing him chest pain. He presented to the emergency department at Maitland Hospital where he underwent a chest x-ray. He was diagnosed with fractured ribs and given some painkillers to relieve his pain. A few months after his discharge, he began to develop a wheeze. He was concerned about this and was scheduled for an x-ray in May. Following this x-ray, Jonathan Beniston and his family were informed that he had lung cancer. His left lung was fully removed in June and he underwent a daily course of chemotherapy for 6 weeks. Jonathan and his wife Alexis attended his oncologist after his round of chemotherapy had finished. And after reviewing the various x-rays Jonathan had undergone, their oncologist informed them that the tumour on his lung had been visible in the x-ray that was taken in January. Now, all of us who've been touched by cancer would understand the importance of knowing that every test that was being taken, for whatever reason, if there was an indication that there was cancer, which could be caught earlier, that should be something that is addressed. And we understand that doctors and nurses and other health workers in our health system are under pressure, and in this particular case, they were not seeking, the patient did not present with an issue that would have indicated lung cancer. There was a physical interaction with him and a child, and he was experiencing pain. And that is not probably something which would, straight off the bat, indicate that there was an issue with cancer. But when that scan was looked at, it should have been looked at for the whole of the lung. If we're putting radiation into people's bodies and putting x-rays in there, we actually need to look at them properly. And the other thing that was concerning about this is when I spoke to Jonathan's wife, she actually said to me that the indication of which ribs had been broken was actually incorrect. So this x-ray had probably fairly less than a cursory scan of it. The upshot of all of this means that Jonathan's lung cancer had the opportunity to have been diagnosed 5 months earlier. And it was only a coincidence, as I said, that he underwent that x-ray in January following his broken ribs. But that notwithstanding, his lung cancer should have been diagnosed or at least put forward for further investigation at the same time. Unforgivably, the tumour went undiscovered until he developed other symptoms. Jonathan and his family have been left wondering, as we all would in this situation, what if the tumour had have been discovered in January, as it should have been? He may still have his left lung if the cancer had have been diagnosed earlier. As anyone who knows, who's in this house, who's come into contact, knows early diagnosis and treatment of cancer is essential. And in this case, Jonathan had a very slim chance that that would be diagnosed, and that was robbed of him. But that is not the issue that relates to this bill specifically. Where it gets quite damning of the health system is that since this time, Jonathan and Alexis have sought answers from the Maitland Hospital and Hunter New England Health on what happened in their case. All they want to know is how this could have happened to them and what measures the government, the health system and the hospital are taking to ensure it doesn't happen to anyone else. They are very reasonable people. They are just looking for an answer as to why this happened and what steps will ensure it doesn't happen again. They are very reasonable and very considered approaches from people who are going through what is undeniably a traumatic time in their life. Unfortunately, the process that they have had to undergo here has been extremely difficult. They've said to me that they felt as if they've been fobbed off. There have been several occasions where they had placed calls to Hunter New England Health and left messages, and some of those calls have never been returned. Since November of 2017, they've been seeking a meeting with Hunter New England Health. Unfortunately, it's taken over 3 precious months for this meeting to occur. I would like to read out the conclusion from Ms Beniston's correspondence to me into Hansard. She says, "My concerns are that if I had not kept ringing and chasing the hospital, they would not have responded, and it's only today, when I mentioned the Healthcare Complaints Commission, that they've actually set up the meeting. I'm worried for members of the public who would have given up and that they were not being listened to, and I'm worried about the procedures at Maitland Hospital. I'm worried that rather than learning from their mistakes, they are trying to push them under the carpet." This is from a member of the public, one of those whom we are all representing in this place. Our health system is not communicating effectively with patients and their families when mistakes occur. The Minister claims that preliminary risk assessments introduced by this bill will allow health officials to make contact with patients earlier, and I hope for the sake of families like the Benistons that this is actually the case. It is clear from the contact with my constituents, and there are so many other stories that I hear every day, that there is much more to be done about accountability, transparency and communication from the Health Department. This government must do more to increase clear lines of communication with patients, and the first step in increasing accountability is to allow preliminary risk assessments to be accessed under Freedom of Information laws. I implore those opposite in the other House to support Labor's amendments to this bill. These amendments will increase transparency and public oversight in our health system, which is much needed. The issues raised by Jonathan and Alexis need to be addressed by the Minister. It is clear that we need to change the way our health officials interact with patients. At all times, patients who've had a poor experience within our health system deserve their questions to be answered and their concerns to be taken seriously. Systemic issues that are uncovered by preliminary risk assessments and a root cause analysis need to be resolved quickly by health officials, but the public deserves to know about these issues and understand what actions are being taken to resolve those issues. The Labor opposition supports this bill in principle, with a few notable exceptions. The government needs to get on board to support Labor's common sense amendments to ensure that transparency is increased within our health system. And as this is discussed in the party rooms on the other side of this chamber, I would urge people to look back at cases within their own electorates of people who have been the victims of mistakes made by the health system and ask themselves, what price is there on an apology to those people? What price is there on the ability of those people to at least understand that there has been a mistake made in their situation, but that there are systemic changes afoot to prevent that happening again. People are reasonable. They deserve to know the truth about their health care all through the time. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is the bill